The night of August 14, 1989, a scheduled train, racing across Siberia, on the railway through the taiga forest. At that moment, a flight attendant noticed there appears to be an object on the tracks ahead. At first they couldn't make out what it was, but when they saw clearly, one of the most chilling episodes in modern Russian history, the most terrifying mystery is about to unfold. This incident occurred in the village of Kaznet, Russia. It's the kind of place that's hard to find even on a map. It lies deep within the Siberian taiga, surrounded by endless pine and birch forests. Rather than a village, it was along a stretch of desolate railroad tracks. A few scattered houses. The population here is approximately 24 people. No stores, no signage. There are no decent roads either. There's only one railroad track nearby, several houses where railway workers and their families reside, and several paths leading deep into the forest. A seemingly endless dirt road, due to its remote location, so the night feels especially cold, even though it's already summer. Yet here, a chill still lingers in the air, as if under the gaze of an invisible eye. 1:40 a.m. on August 14, 1989. In this very silence, freight train number 2008 roared by, heading to Kazan station. This train is very long. There are 70 train cars, pulled by a heavy locomotive. There were two experienced railroad workers, Vadim and Igor. The Fesapurin brothers are driving. They had passed through Kaznet countless times, but this time was different. As the train approaches the station, the brothers noticed something on the tracks ahead. At first, under the sweeping glare of the headlights, it's hard to make out what it is, but Vadim sounded the horn anyway, simultaneously slam on the emergency brakes. Unfortunately, a fully loaded freight train simply cannot come to an instant stop. Therefore, despite the brothers' best efforts, in the end, I still couldn't get into the car. Before the wheel rolls over the foreign object, bring the train to a complete stop. After the train finally came to a complete stop, the two brothers got out of the car with lanterns to investigate. Slowly moving along the tracks, they are concerned about wildlife debris near the railroad tracks. Even fallen branches have become a commonplace sight. But this time, the obstacle was entirely different. They didn't even realize it. This discovery will become a traumatic event in their lives. Only the remains of 7 people were scattered along the tracks. Although at that time, they may not be aware of the exact number of people, but it is evident that these 7 individuals have completely ceased showing any signs of life. The Supurin brothers stood beside the wreckage, become aware of, I might have gotten myself mixed up in something terrible, an absolute impossibility. Cases explained by simple accidents, about to happen. Upon receiving the alert, the dispatcher, police at the larger Abakan station nearby, dispatched to the scene. Villagers near the station were roused one after another. The somber task of collecting the wreckage has begun. Soon the names of these deceased individuals were identified one by one. They are Dmitry, Nikolai Vadim, Oleg Vyacheslav Roman and Victor. These 7 boys are only 15 years old. All hail from the small community of Mezdyurinsk. They are a close-knit group of good friends. We used to play soccer together. Let's go to school together. Help your parents with chores and such. This trip to the forest, it was for a simple weekend snow collection. Journey of the pine cone. Who would have thought that this parting, thus parted from my family by the veil between life and death? At first, investigators said it was nothing more than a tragic accident. The boys entered the taiga forest on August 12th. I had planned to go the following evening, take the 10:39 train home. However, a serious error occurred. Perhaps they forgot the time. Perhaps I got lost in the woods. Regardless of the reason, they clearly missed the train. According to preliminary reports, they must have been resting on the railroad tracks. Later, people discovered their backpacks, neatly arranged about 250 meters away. This detail made headlines. 7 backpacks lined up beside the railroad tracks, as if part of some ritual or agreement. Its implication is unsettling. The reporters unhesitatingly portrayed it as evidence that the boys may have agreed to end their lives. But for parents, this is utter nonsense. These children are not reckless troublemakers. They have wilderness survival experience. No harmful habits such as alcoholism or drug abuse. The autopsy report did not reveal any evidence from their bodies. Detected traces of alcohol and drugs. They are all well-nourished. Good health, quick-witted, is also cherished. They decided to end their lives or take a nap on the railroad tracks. Absolutely ridiculous. In other words, even if it were true as reported, why did they remain motionless as the train approached? Why haven't they woken up? Even the Supulin brothers testified that they are not walking on the tracks, but lay there motionless, as if someone had placed it there. Despite being full of holes, the authorities continue to insist this was nothing but a tragic and horrific accident. It is claimed that the boys were exhausted at the time. Thus, a terrible mistake was made. The case is hereby closed, but parents clearly won't let it rest at that. They were convinced there was something more sinister behind the matter. Unfortunately, they have no evidence, no one supports, nor does it have any influence, only sorrow, and they consider this an indescribable injustice. This only intensified the grief. Out of sheer desperation, Meridu, the people of Lykinski stood in shock and silence, buried their son, but this silence did not last long. Soon the whispers turned to suspicion. Suspicion turned into anger. None, a family can accept the official explanation. Over the next 2 years, they repeatedly pleaded with local officials to reopen the case, but kept hitting a brick wall. No one answered the phone. The files have also mysteriously disappeared. It is clear, the authorities have no interest in re-examining this tragedy. This especially means acknowledging the initial investigation was not only flawed, corruption may even exist. In the face of this situation, the families exhausted every possible avenue to file appeals beyond the usual channels. Autumn 1991, they wrote a letter in desperation, sent directly to Russian President Boris Yeltsin, call on him to order a re-examination of this case. At that time, the Soviet Union was on the brink of collapse. The nation plunged into chaos. The chances of this letter being read are extremely slim, not to mention that someone would take action. But fate is cruel. The letter finally reached the right person, and surprisingly, it worked. October 8, 1991, Office of the Attorney General. The investigation into the death of Kaznet has been formally reopened. Subsequently, 2 new investigators have been assigned to handle this case. They are investigator Vladimir Fedorkov and criminal prosecutor Yuri Festoryarov. Fortunately, they are not mere clerks who deal with trivial matters, but rather transferred from Moscow, those who are truly capable of handling difficult cases. Soon the 2 arrived at Kaznet, but they discovered, since the case was first discovered, the scene had long since been erased by time. The scene had long since been erased by time. Rainwater, snowmelt, and decay have nearly erased all traces. They also found that the few remaining pieces of evidence from 1989, either mishandled by the police, either be completely ignored. With no other choice, Vladimir could only go door to door, ask every local, repeatedly pressed for details of the incident. But strangely enough, this time, however, the villagers unanimously chose to remain silent. They're practically all related. The ancient capital claims to know nothing. They all say that when the train ran over those 7 people, I'm sleeping at home. However, as Vladimir pressed on with his relentless questioning, he still learned from the villagers. They pried out a name, Vasily. Vasily. He is a local man who killed his brother Slava, the man who was imprisoned. This murder case, at first glance, it seemed like just another drunken brawl. However, in the context of the new investigation, the situation has changed somewhat, especially when Vladimir learned Slav may have been drunk at the time, casually revealed Kaznet. After the real experiences of those 7 people, upon learning of this situation, he went to the prison. After multiple visits, gradually pried open Vasily's mouth. At first, his account was confused and constantly changing. Later, a confession surfaced. This confession is incomplete and was given reluctantly, but sufficient to drive the investigation forward. Vasily disclosed to the police he and his other brother Yuri were involved in this matter. That's how it is. The authorities' persistent insistence on falsehoods suddenly collapsed, but the deeper Vladimir investigated, the more it becomes clear that Vasily's argument is unreasonable. He seems to be lying again. Vladimir then requested the family members allow him to exhume the body. This is a daunting task, but when the coffin was opened, when the forensic expert re-examined the evidence, their discovery completely altered the course of the entire incident. Just as people suspected, these 7 individuals did not die from being run over by a train. On the contrary, it has been determined They were subjected to a brutal and premeditated attack. Moreover, their injuries were uniformly chilling. Skull fracture with bilateral mandibular comminution, trauma to the chest and abdomen. All 7 individuals exhibited clear signs of blunt force trauma. Experts also conducted tests using mannequins, attempting to recreate these wounds. The result was sent. Currently, only specific tools from the railway warehouse can be used. Only such a force could cause such a wound. This was clearly no accident. Physical evidence is now available to prove this. At least the investigators are willing to face the truth. The Supurin brothers, their testimony subsequently corroborated this. According to these 2 train drivers, when they realized there was something on the tracks, the moment I saw those people in the glow of the train lights, they are not scattered haphazardly. They were neatly arranged. And it just so happened that the train was passing by, a position that would make them unrecognizable. This also relates to the placement of the backpack. No alcohol or drugs were found in the victim's system, and without any scars caused by panic. Vladimir's new conjecture is, they were ambushed or attacked. Then it was placed on the railroad tracks. That's how it is. The case file became part of a murder investigation. Moreover, questions outweigh answers, because even though Vasily began to confess, but what he said still didn't make sense. He claimed, "My buddy and I took care of these 7 guys." This seems unlikely. Those boys were well built, yet these brothers were frail and sickly. How could these 2 possibly overpower 7 healthy people? Still had the strength to drag them onto the tracks. And just then, the story has changed again. Vasily claimed there was a 3rd attacker named Slava. That is, the brother he later killed. Vasily claimed it was Slava who delivered the fatal blow. This claim is highly questionable, because Slava is already dead. Therefore, he was unable to refute the matter. Nevertheless, Vladimir is still pursuing. His intuition told him, this is not merely an internal family matter. Later, he coaxed another name out of Vasily. During a separate interrogation, Vasily blurted out, "A new name has been given, Nikolai." This is not the name of some ordinary villager, but rather the name of a senior police superintendent from a nearby village. That weekend, he was visiting relatives in Kazan. He is also a powerful and influential person. When Vladimir found Nikolai, Nikolai claimed he had left the village long before the incident occurred. This appears to be an airtight alibi, until the locals refuted him. After all, when the incident occurred, Nikolai was right there. Witnesses said, seeing him and those brothers, and drank with a local railroad foreman. That night they were all together, and drank a lot. Ultimately, through more conversation, another name surfaced, a man named Peter. He is the foreman's brother, but Peter won't spill the beans like Vladimir did. It wasn't that he refused, but he died, evidently shortly after the investigation was reopened. Took his own life. The investigation into the case has reached this point. Various clues pieced together paint a disturbing picture. During a particularly grueling interrogation that followed, the local foreman had a breakdown. He'd had enough of the endless questioning and the guilt within. So, agree to tell Vladimir everything he wants to know. He named the relevant individuals, described that night. It recounts the drinking-related altercation and the weapons used. Finally, 1989. The truth about what happened to those 7 boys is about to come to light. 2 years ago, the sun sank beneath the dense canopy of the taiga forest. Kaznet was enveloped in the familiar stillness of the night. However, in one of the few houses near the railroad tracks, the boisterous clamor of men drinking heavily drifted over. At that time, at least 3 liters of homemade liquor were passed around among them. The names of those gathered around the table are now household names. There was a local foreman and his brother, and Vasily and his brother, my brother Yuri and the visiting Nikolai of Jingdu. They aren't celebrating anything. It's not like I'm mourning anything, just because I'm bored. And in Kaznet, boredom can be a dangerous thing. As the wine flows more and more, the night grows deeper and deeper. The wine was eventually finished, but this does not mean their nightlife came to an end. They want to have another drink, but the only place in town that could be considered a store, it's been closed for a long time. So, they made Kaznet's men when bored. Things everyone does. They went to the train station to look for Yassi. This in the local language, it means a railway freight handler. These individuals sometimes carry contraband goods, used for exchange or bribery. But that night, they did not find Yassi. Instead, he saw 7 young boys. They stood nearby waiting. The train foreman claimed the boys were trying to use a wire at the time. Short-circuit the rails. Trigger signal. Stop the next train. That way they can hop in the car and head home. But this argument simply doesn't hold water, because there were no wires on site. Moreover, the boys were quite familiar with the train stopping times. They know trains usually arrive at the station at 10:39 p.m. There is absolutely no reason to interfere with the tracks. But the prisoners still clung to this excuse. They need a reason no matter what, even if this reason is far-fetched. Thus, a conflict erupted between the two sides. The arguing grew louder and louder. Then the attack began. According to the confession, it all began with that Jingdu. He is well-built, muscular, armed, exudes an air of authority, and without hesitation, he took action. It is said that when one of the 7 boys knelt before him, when attempting to defuse the situation in this manner, Nikolai Jingdu didn't hesitate at all. Shot the boy in the head. The blow caused the boy to die instantly. It also left the other boys stunned in their tracks. In the instant that followed, the boys hadn't yet recovered from their panic. Nikolai immediately shouted, "Let other men take them all out. Leave no witnesses behind." Chaos immediately erupted on the scene. They grabbed whatever tools they could get their hands on. He pounced like a beast. Some of the 7 boys tried to escape, but Nikolai had a gun in his hand. He ordered them to halt. "Otherwise, I'll shoot." The boys were stunned once again upon hearing this. The men then continued their assault until they all fell into the mud beside the tracks. After that, as the so-called Nikolai, the guardian of law and order, once again direct others to set up the scene. He knew a train would be passing by soon, so they proceeded with great care, deliberately moved these 7 people onto the railroad tracks. Then, they lined up the boys' backpacks hundreds of meters away, so that this story sounds like these are just tired and foolish boys. He lay down on the railroad tracks to rest. When this dreadful task is completed, the men scattered in all directions. Later, the 1:40 a.m. train passed through Kazan, crushed the wreckage to smithereens. When the Sukurin brothers stepped off the freight train, walking along the railroad tracks with a lantern in hand, those men had long since vanished, and the boys were already beyond redemption. And so this ugly and outrageous truth, finally unveiled. When the case comes to trial, the entire nation is watching. Although the tribunal was established in 1995, the trial did not begin until nearly 6 years after the incident was first discovered. But the courtroom was packed with the victims' parents, local resident reporter, and all those following this case. Over the next 7 months or so, the trial has been ongoing. Finally, when the judge read and pronounced the verdict, the judgment allows for an extension of the term for over an hour. Nikolai, who led the attack, was sentenced to death. Foreman and the brothers Vasily and Yuri were also sentenced to death. Justice seems to have finally prevailed. In a system that is often unstable, this appears to be a rare moment of accountability. But, just as these people began awaiting execution in their cells, the country, however, underwent a political shift. Russia's efforts to join the Council of Europe begin adjusting laws to comply with European human rights standards. This includes the abolition of the death penalty. May 31, 1996, First Deputy Chairman of Russia's Supreme Court lodges protest. He demanded the court's ruling be overturned during the protest and refer the case for reinvestigation. The Supreme Court subsequently agreed. And just like that, everything vanished into thin air. Not only was the judgment overturned, moreover, due to the intricate legal framework, chaos and procedural timeline, those previously convicted were thus released. They were not retried, nor was he detained. Just like that, they were let out. Moreover, if you're already feeling the darkness by this point, what happens next will be even darker. Shortly after his release, Vasily attacked one of his cousins. According to some people, his cousin knew everything, and during the reinvestigation, he intends to come clean about everything. At the same time, one of the convicted brothers, Yuri, was also found dead. According to different reports, the cause of death was either asphyxiation, either it's sudden pneumonia. Then the most spine-chilling incident occurred. A railway worker. He helped move 7 boys off the tracks. Key witness, one of, was also found dead under the wheels of a train in Kaznet. It is alleged that he slipped and fell onto the tracks. So even though the initial incident was already terrifying enough, but somehow, he did not end in 1989. He seemed to have merely changed direction. But what is admirable is, amidst all these changes, those families betrayed and oppressed by the bureaucratic system, I have been fighting all along. By the late 1990s, Kaznet, the story of the 7 boys, has faded from the headlines. Other scandals have taken their place. Moreover, there are numerous of them. The country at that time, teetering on the brink under the crushing weight of the war on corruption and the demands of transformation. Most people believe this case has been closed, but the victims' parents have not let up. February 1997. They are striving to promote. The Attorney General's office has reopened the investigation. The legal grounds this time are that the circumstances are insufficient. The investigation took another 4 years. 3 additional fasting tests were conducted. 5 expert forensic reviews. Over 100 witnesses were questioned. There is testimony that was not previously considered. The forensic expert re-examined the same bone fragments. A large number of old documents were also retrieved from the government office. Over the years, one name keeps being mentioned, Nikolai. Since being released, he became a city council member. You heard me right. One of the central figures in this 7-person murder case. He actually used the time after his release from prison to enter politics. But in the fall of 2001, a miracle happened. Supreme Court of the Republic of the Caucasus. A new judgment has been rendered. Nikolai, Gongtu and Vasily were again found guilty of murder. This judgment is final. But for many people, this remains disproportionate to the crimes they committed. Nikolai and the foreman, sentenced to a maximum security prison, served a 10-year prison sentence. Vasily was sentenced to only 7 years. For parents, this still leaves a deep-seated resentment in my heart. But even so, Nikolai never ceased to appeal, as always. The one who commands the entire world still claims to be the real victim. The families could only endure all this in silence. Despite experiencing the loss of loved ones, lies, retrials, and politics, the manipulation of truth will eventually come to light and accepted by people. It's not because the system worked. It is because parents refused to let the truth be buried. Ultimately, they forced the world to confront that cold August night in 1989. What actually happened? In Kaznet after the 7 murders, it will never be the same again. This small town, although on the surface, expressing concern and regret over this case, but I've always known something. His silence is complicity. What happened there? Not merely an unspeakable crime, it is a warning about the failure of justice. The story tells of when those in power believe they can do as they please, how bitter the consequences of his arrogance will be.